Good evening. Today we're continuing learning about parenting, and again, I'm going to show you the book that we are using, Spare the Child by Rabbi Yechiel Yaakovson, and we are on page 10 of the book. And to quickly review, I'm going to go one paragraph back. We first of all spoke about the proper way to learn this book, that this book is a textbook. It's not an easy read, it's not a novel, but rather it guides you step by step, explains to you proper techniques, what to avoid, and also this book will teach you mainly two things: the difference between the chinuch, which means education, and control, and what is education, what is control, and when to use education and when to use control. Both education and control are important. Control is more at the younger stage of their life, and education is for older stage. You cannot have one without the other, and you need to understand both in order to use them properly. Now, in the middle of page 10, he says, this is the basis for our essential definition of chinuch toward Avodat Hashem. What is proper education? Things that we do that cause our children to experience joy and pleasure in spiritual activities, to desire spiritual activities, and to learn how to achieve them. So again, these are the main goals of our education, for Jewish education, that our children should enjoy spiritual pursuits, they should want it, and they should have tools, knowledge, how to achieve it. That is what's going to give us the greatest happiness as parents, when we see that our children are following on the way of Torah, they are strongly committed to Hashem, and at the same time, they are happy people. Because we know that happy people achieve more in life, and they're easier to deal with, they hurt less people, and they help out and inspire many more people, and they stay religious longer and stronger, as opposed to people who are religious unhappily. Anything that does not connect a child to the joy and pleasure of Avodat Hashem cannot be defined as education. So again, these are such important words that we have to repeat it again and again and remind ourselves. Anything that does not connect the child to the joy and pleasure in serving Hashem is not education. You might think it's education. I'm going to train my child, I'm going to guide my child, I'm going to instruct my child. But if instead of pleasure they get turned off, then you're not educating them. Then chas v'shalom, you are taking them away from Hashem, chas v'shalom. Anything that conflicts with this goal is the exact opposite of education. Even if it relates to the child's Torah and keeping the mitzvot. So you might say, yes, it's important for my child to say Birkat Hamazon. It is true. But how do you go about educating your child to say Birkat Hamazon? And the answer is in a way that will make the child happy to do it, receive pleasure when he's doing it, want to do it, and know how to do it. And so once you know this principle, everything else is easy. You will be able to figure out what to do just by following this principle. The way I talk to my child about mitzvot or about learning Torah, about character traits, will that give them pleasure in following my advice? Will that give them desire to do what I say? And will that give them tools how to do it? If the answer to all three is yes, then what you are teaching your children is good. But if you answer one of these questions in a negative and you'll say, for example, you know what, I'm angry, I'm frustrated with this child, why they again don't want to do it, why they're lazy, and so I'm going to let them know, and I'm going to scream at them, or I'm going to push them hard to say Birkat Hamazon, to wear kippah, to wear tzitzit, and to do any other mitzvah without thinking, how will they react? Will they be upset? Will they have negative association with wearing kippah, putting on tzitzit, saying Birkat Hamazon? And therefore, it will distance them. Then it would be better if I didn't say it. Because it would be better that they should stay where they are rather than being more distant. So if a parent regularly causes his child to experience negative feelings when he makes him do something related to Torah, he is actively ruining the child's education. And the same is for a teacher or a Rabbi in a classroom setting. To be very careful how they encourage people. It should be encouragement and not pushing, not enforcing, not gendarming, not policing. Punishment and force may sometimes be called for, but in such a case, it's not defined as education, but rather as control. And that's something we have to remember, that punishment, consequence, and force are necessary ingredients in successful parenting, but they don't fall under education, they fall under control. And as we said, control is necessary when you know how to use it and when to use it. Otherwise, it should be sparsely used, because, as we're going to learn, control means that I get done what I want to get done, but it does not bring the child to desire, to like, to get pleasure from the task, which means, by definition, that's not education. And that's why it's only at a young age to actually train the child to make the first step, so that the child gets the technical knowledge of how to perform the task. That's when we exercise control and force the child to do it. But after that, there must be education, and control has to finish at that point. They are sometimes necessary to set the stage for the true education. Okay, and at this point, I would like to give an example that I experienced firsthand from my rabbi. My rabbi was in a wheelchair, and he used to travel from his house. He would get into his car, bring his wheelchair into his car, drive to the yeshiva where I used to learn, and take the wheelchair out of the car, bring himself down from the car into the wheelchair, and ride his wheelchair into the Beit Midrash, into the yeshiva, where he would pray mincha. And people were surprised, and they asked him, "You are handicapped. Why are you doing so much in order to pray mincha, afternoon service. Why don't you pray at the synagogue, which is right next to your house, which both the house and the synagogue have handicapped ramps, so you can roll down in your wheelchair down the ramp and right away go into the ramp of the synagogue. It was right next to each other, and you don't have to climb out of your wheelchair into the car, drive from the car into the wheelchair, and then reverse to go back home. Why don't you pray in the synagogue? Why do you come to yeshiva to pray? And he said that he grew up in Yerushalayim, and being raised by the old style family who valued prayer and who would force their children to pray, he developed a distaste for prayer. He says, whenever I open a siddur, I right away remember my father telling me to pray. I right away remember screaming and punishments if I don't pray. And I can't pray. I open the siddur, I get into that negative state of mind, and that's it, I cannot pray. I found that the only place where I can pray with desire is when I come to the yeshiva, where the boys are Baalei Teshuvah, boys that come from non-religious backgrounds, and they chose to be religious. And they want to pray not because their parents tell them, the opposite. Their parents might tell them, why are you praying so much? Why are you not studying for college? Why are you learning? And they go and they pray against their parents' wishes. He says, when I see a room full of such boys, I have desire to pray also. They inspire me. Nobody's forcing them. Must be prayer is something beautiful. Prayer is something important. So he says, if I don't come to this yeshiva, I will not be able to pray in any other synagogue. So he was already in his 60s, and the childhood trauma still affected him. And because the parents used control and not education, he, until old age, was not able to pray in any other place except in a Baalei Teshuvah yeshiva. He was trying to get what his parents didn't give him, the love and desire to do mitzvot willingly. So he told me always, he said, Binyamin, when you have your children, never force them to pray. Don't drag them to synagogue unless they want. Don't tell them to pray unless they want. Show them example. Inspire them. Tell them stories. But don't be on top of them. Don't turn pages for them. And don't say why you're not praying. Now, we're on page 11. We are not going to prove that this is the true Torah approach to chinuch. That is beyond the scope of this book. This is not a philosophical book. It's a practical book. Anyone who doubts it should consult with a Torah sage, and they will see that that is the proper way. And I just gave a real lifetime example that when we only use control, it has short-term effect to forcing the child to do what we want, but not long-term effect. And as we quoted the verse, Chanoch lenar al pi darko, educate a child according to his way, Gam ki yazkin lo yasur mimenu. Even when he grows up, becomes older, he will not depart from the path that you set for him. And you see that in the case of my Rabbi, the path that his parents wanted him to be on, to pray, he only prayed when they were on top of him. But as soon as he left their home, he stopped praying. And he had to encourage himself and re-teach himself how to pray again. That's the danger of control, that it will force the child to do what we want temporarily, and that's it. But chinuch, education, requires that the the love, the desire, and the skill that we give our children should last them beyond our control of them. When they are in yeshiva, when the parent is not there, and later when they are in a synagogue when their Rabbi is not there, and later when they are at home saying Birkat Hamazon, when nobody is there, they should be able to have the love and desire to pray or to do any mitzvah just as if somebody is standing on top of them. That's the beauty of Judaism. And to give you another practical example, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Miberdichev, who always looked to say good things about the Jewish people, one Erev Pesach, a few hours before Passover, he went into the Jewish village and he stopped every Jew and he said, "Do you have any chametz? I need some chametz. Do you have any chametz?" And every Jew said, "God forbid, chas v'shalom. No, we don't have any chametz." And then he did the same experiment and he said, "Oh, do you have this contraband? Do you have this forbidden item? Do you have this illegal substance?" And everyone said, "Yeah, if you, for the right price, I can get it for you." And he turned to Hashem and he said, "Ribono shel olam, Master of the universe, look at your children, how precious they are. You told them, don't eat chametz, and leaven should not be found in your possession. And I tried to find even a crumb of chametz, and no one has it. And there are no policemen, there is no security, no one is standing on top of them. They're doing your will willingly." As opposed to, look at the king, the Russian king. He decreed this is illegal and this is forbidden and this is contraband, and nobody cares, even though there are policemen and even though there are jails and fines. No one listens to the king. This is the proper way that a Jew should be doing Hashem's will without any force, without any control from outside, just from his desire. And that's our goal in education, in chinuch, to give our children this love and pleasure from doing mitzvot and learning Torah, that they should be eager, they should want to learn, they should want to pray, and we don't have to push them. When they graduate high school, the goal is that the children should tell us, "I want to go to Beit Midrash. I want to go to seminary. I want to remain religious. I want to marry someone who is religious." How do we do it? By giving them pleasure, desire, and knowledge about mitzvot. This is what this book is about. To illustrate how this principle works in real life. Now, an example from the book. An accomplished Torah scholar, Talmid Chacham, was devastated. His teenage son would no longer pray. And the father couldn't understand it. He had always put a special focus on training his son to daven properly. Here's how he described it. "I always insisted on praying shacharit with my son. I would pray at minyanim that were not convenient for me, in order to be with my son to supervise him. I made sure that he sat at my side through the prayer. I made sure that he prayed from the open siddur. During davening, I would watch him carefully and make sure that he remained focused. If he ever began dreaming, I would immediately snap him back to attention. In short, I put all my energies specifically into his prayer. And this is where I failed worst. How did this happen? Was he exposed to some other negative influence that overcame all my efforts? The father wondered. But the boy's own answer to this painful question was not surprising. I hate praying with my father more than anything else. For years, I've been dreaming of the day when I'll be big enough to skip prayer. Just entering the synagogue makes me sick. I'm sure it's because my father was so on top of me all these years. It made my prayer so oppressive that I just can't stand it. I hate sitting for so long, and I hate thinking about God and Gehinnom all the time. This goes so well in line with the story I told you about my rabbi. Exactly the same experience and the same result. This poor father did everything he could to teach his child to pray. Everything except for the main thing, education, chinuch. According to our definition, chinuch, education means to cause the child to experience spiritual pleasure and joy. To cause the child to enjoy praying and to want to pray on his own. How do you do that? First of all, the father should have offered encouragement and compliments. I remember when I was just beginning to pray, just beginning to become religious. I visited a synagogue in Philadelphia on Simchat Torah. And this was one of my first times in a synagogue on holidays. And I was not so familiar with the Siddur. I knew how to read Hebrew, but that's about it. And so when I came to the synagogue, they gave me the Siddur, and slowly, I tried to read as slow as I could, one paragraph while they went pages and pages. And at the end of prayer, a man in his 50s came up to me, and he was smiling, and he said, "You know, prayer in Hebrew is called avodah shebalev, the work in your heart, which means it's work, it's hard work, labor." And he told me, "I noticed that for you it's real. I saw how you were working hard to pray. I saw how you were concentrating, trying to read the words. So I want to compliment you on fulfilling what prayer really should be. It should be work." And I felt very good about it. I said, okay, without knowing, I did something good. And that stayed with me. That one compliment that man gave me in that synagogue in Philadelphia stayed with me for the past 25 years. And it gives me constant inspiration and chizuk, strength. Because I remember every time I feel down and say, "Oh, I don't have desire, I don't have energy," and I say, "I know I can," because that man said that prayer is hard work, and I did it. I can do it. So this is the power of encouragement. So the father should have offered encouragement and compliment. He should have told his son how proud he was to see him davening so seriously. He should have told him how much Hashem loves him for it. He should have made a big deal about it at home, in front of the whole family. He should have done anything else that would associate prayer with feelings of warmth, love, pleasure, and fulfillment. Only things that cause the child to like the experience of prayer can be defined as chinuch, education towards prayer. But sadly, this father did the opposite. Instead of drawing his son close to prayer, he actively pushed him away, far away from it. For this boy, prayer turned into a source of guilt. As he expressed himself, I hate thinking about Hashem and Gehinnom all the time. Since the boy wasn't naturally interested in prayer, his father had to make him do it through strict supervision, scolding, and criticism. Davening under his father's critical eye made the experience a tense and miserable one for the boy each day. So he started to hate it. For him, prayer became associated with stress and misery. The father raised the issue with a known educator, and he gave him the same answer as we gave in this book. And while the father was speaking to the rabbi, something happened that illustrated to the father this point. A 4-year-old daughter of the rabbi was about to eat candy, and she didn't want to make a blessing. That's a common scenario. What do? We just said you have to make the child feel good about making blessings. And here you have a 4-year-old who doesn't want to make a blessing. What do? The rabbi turned to his guest and asked, what would you do now? How would you get her to make a blessing? The father said, I would take away the candy. The rabbi replied, taking the candy away is not chinuch, is not education toward making blessings. It's just a preventive measure. We'll manage to stop her from eating without a blessing. But the father answered, but if she wants the candy back, she'll make a blessing. So we'll train her to make blessing if she wants food. True, agreed the rabbi. But that's still not training her to make blessings. This is exactly the point we've been discussing. I can get a child to pray and make a blessing, but if she makes the blessing just so she will not lose the candy, I haven't successfully motivated her to make blessings. Okay, responded the father. Go ahead. Why don't you show me how you would handle the situation? The rabbi turned to his daughter and said, Hashem loves us very much. That's why he gives us a lot of good things. But we can't eat them without a blessing. That's like not saying thank you. If right now it's hard for you to make a blessing and tell Hashem thank you, then put the candy away and eat it when you're ready to make the blessing. The girl agreed to make the blessing. When she finished, her father enthusiastically launched into a dramatic description of thousands of angels in Shamayim singing the most beautiful songs to Hashem, using very dramatic terms, which were clearly beyond the young girl. He described the grandeur of the scene and the breathtaking beauty of the songs. He then lowered his voice dramatically. Suddenly, the singing stopped. Everyone was quiet. Why? Because they heard a sweet little voice coming from down below. Everyone listened carefully. And what did they hear? Your voice. They heard you making a bracha. Hashem was so excited to hear you. He loves to hear you so much that he quieted all the millions of angels. Your blessing came all the way up, and the malachim excitedly tied diamonds to it. And Hashem was so happy that his daughter, who he loves so much, is making a bracha to him. The girl got so excited that she ran to the kitchen to ask her mother for something else to make the bracha on. This was obviously extreme to illustrate the point, but it illustrates true education, chinuch. It is a classic example of a measure taken to make the child experience pleasure and satisfaction from Avodat Hashem. And this is a specifically good example because it shows both control and chinuch working together. The father exercised control, the rabbi, the father of this girl, in saying that let's put the candy away until you're ready to make blessing and say thank you to Hashem. Which he did in a more positive way, not saying you cannot have it until you make the blessing, but rather saying it positively. I want you to have the candy, and Hashem wants you to have the candy. Yes, have the candy. Just make the blessing first. Instead of saying, I'm not giving you the candy until you make the blessing, which is a negative way. So he used control in a positive way, and then as soon as the daughter made the blessing, he jumped at the opportunity to now do education, chinuch, to inspire her, make her feel good, make her proud. He praised her. He showed her how important and beautiful her action was. So this is a very very good example. So now someone asks, what if the daughter still refuses? So that's very simple. Because you phrase it in a positive way, you make it up to her. Not that I'm not giving you the candy until you make the blessing, which puts the control in me and makes her feel like she's subservient to you and makes her resist. Rather, it's your candy. Hashem wants you to eat it. I want you to eat it. We want you to enjoy. Whenever you're ready, make it, and that's it. You can have it. And even though she will not eat it until she makes the blessing, because again, the father has this control, he can say, yes, we're going to put the candy away. When you're ready, when you want to eat it, just make a blessing, you can have it. So if she doesn't want, yes, you still keep the candy away. Once you started this, as we are going to learn that whatever you say, you have to stick to it. In the future, maybe you will decide that your daughter is not old enough yet. It's questionable at 4 years old if you have to insist on them making blessing. But once you told them to make the blessing, you have to stick to it. Your words have to have value, have to carry weight. So once you entered the discussion and told her that she can eat the candy once she makes the blessing, you have to stick to it. Okay, now we're on page 14. An important side point. If we want to motivate a child through such chinuch measures, we must also be aware of the difficulties that the child faces and counter them with a well-fitted compensation, which means you have to also consider the point of view of the child. Maybe they really do have a valid concern, difficulty, a problem. Can't just be a tyrant and say, that's it, you have to do it, otherwise you're not getting it. In other words, if we want to encourage a new behavior, then apart from finding ways to cause the child to enjoy and appreciate what he is doing, we need to also be aware of the difficulties it presents him and find ways to counter them. The continuation of the above incident illustrates this. This father with his son who he wanted to forced to pray, tried to use this approach with a younger child. Prayer had become a major struggle with this child as well. Now we're talking about the second child. He failed with the older child. Now he wants to encourage the younger child. And he's going to try better with the knowledge that he has. The father had been dealing with it only through force. The father now changed his approach and tried to get his child to like the prayer by means of praises and encouragement. But it didn't work. As soon as the father eased his strict supervision, the child took advantage of the freedom and ran away from prayer, even though he clearly did enjoy his father's new way of relating to him. After some time passed and the father felt that no progress was being made, he returned for advice. After discussion, it turned out that the father simply had no idea what a challenge prayer was for this particular child. The father's regular seat was near the back of the synagogue. It was near an area where a group of children hung out, and they laughed at anyone who prayed too much of a tzaddik. The adults sitting in that area also behaved in a way that provided a very negative example for the children sitting around them. The more this father strictly enforced his son's prayer, the more the other children made fun of both of them. So the father put his child in a great challenge. Under normal circumstances, it's difficult to encourage your child to pray. But putting him in an environment where people are making fun of him is making it impossible. Ordinary encouragement is not enough to counter this sort of situation. So this called for a more extreme form of bribery. It does not create enough of a positive experience to compensate for the misery and difficulty that prayer involved. In order to effectively fight with the reality that his son was facing, the father was advised to find ways to ease his difficulty and to enhance the compensation, to find an extraordinary form of positive reinforcement. And this is what the father did. This is an extreme example, but again, it's in order to illustrate what lengths we have to go in order to teach important values to our children. In order to make it easier for the child, the father moved his seat toward the front of the synagogue, where the atmosphere was much more serious. In addition, to enhance the compensation, the father talked with the Rav of the shul, and they decided on the following. On Shabbat, after prayer, the Rav announced that a special kiddush was going to be held only for children. All the kids were excited. At the kiddush, as the children dug in, the Rav spoke. You must be curious about why I made you this kiddush. Let me tell you a story. Once there were a few children who were invited to the palace of a king. They were taken to a spot on the palace grounds where they were given bags and told to spend a certain amount of time gathering stones. The children didn't realize that these stones were actually diamonds. They wasted their time playing around, gathering just a few stones here and there. But one of the children, a serious and responsible boy, worked as hard as he could, trying not to waste a minute. He kept it up even though it was hard to be the only one working hard, while the others not only took it easy but also made fun of him. The rabbi described in detail how they made fun and how bad he felt and how hard he worked to keep up his efforts anyway. The Rav went on to describe what happened when the time ran out. He described the other children's regret when they realized what they had missed, and how happy this one boy was that he had managed to overcome and ignore the ridicule. Not only that, said the Rav, this boy was especially lucky because not only was he allowed to keep everything he had collected, but he was given everything that the others had collected as well. When the king found out that they had all made fun of him, he took everything that they had collected and gave it to this boy. When he finished the story, the rabbi walked over to the boy, placed his hand on his shoulder, and said, "It is very sad that such special boys like you should lose the great treasure that Hashem wants to give you. Every word of davening is gold. Every sentence is a diamond. Isn't it a terrible shame to lose this? If you want to know," he continued, "I am jealous of this boy. Do you hear that? I, the old Rav of this shul, am very jealous of this boy." He told the boys about this boy. Because even though the other children made fun of him, he just kept davening seriously. The Rav then shook his hand, and the boy almost burst into tears. About half a year later, the father wrote, "It is difficult for me to come and thank you in person, but I am endlessly grateful to you. I can barely recognize my son. I never dreamed that a child could love davening so much." This demonstrates the way to compensate the child in proportion to the difficulty he faces. The more difficult it is, the greater measures we must take to counter it. And, of course, helping him around, helping him with it. Again, simple, "Oh, you're such a good boy," "Oh, you're praying so nicely," was not enough in this case. The child needed help to ease the situation, to ease the challenge, moving the seat. And he needed encouragement, in this case, not only from the father, but for the rabbi of the synagogue in front of everyone. Now, at this point, I would like to pause until next week. Bezat Hashem, we're stopping on page 16 on the bottom, and we will continue with another example. And next week, Bezat Hashem, we will go on to chapter 2. Thank you for listening. Have a great night.